That music gets me pumped up every time.
Hello and welcome to East End Community Housing. I'm Christina DeSanti and this is my co-host Michael Daly. And today we are introducing the book Abundance, which has become a very popular nationwide phenomenon, really, honestly, at
A
this
movement,
point.
yeah.
It's become a movement, written by Ezra Klein from the New York Times. And when I first read this book a few months ago, when it first came on the scene, I called Michael and I said, this is everything that we have been talking about. Literally, this book could have been written about affordable housing issues on the East End and why we can't get anything accomplished or get enough accomplished. So the premise of the book is we spend enough time, first of all, let me back up. We spend enough time blaming as a community when we can't make any forward progress, blaming the people and the politicians for maybe not getting as much done in a quicker time frame. But really, the premise of this book is that it's not the people, it's the process. And we have basically backed ourselves into a position where it's all about keeping things from getting done. Overregulated, overzoned. The process for accepting grants comes with, so many strings, right? Is that what you would
So many
agree?
hoops and so many things to overcome and walls and
Right.
requirements and everything requires in-depth environmental review,
Right.
which local
Which is
people
worthy.
can.
All of these things are worthy.
We have to
but-
protect the
Right.
environment. The environment is critical. I mean,
Right.
what's most important about us here on the East End really is our environment.
Right. It's our open space, our clean water. Right.
Yeah, so,
Right.
no one wants to ruin that,
Right.
but by virtue of the fact that one person can say, oh, if you do that, you're gonna ruin the environment, and they can file a lawsuit which can delay the development of something that we really do need, let's say the 79 units in Sag Harbor,
Right.
that was up 2 years ago, and a local group said, oh no, that's gonna hurt the environment, filed a lawsuit and killed it. So now
Right.
we have 0 units in Sag Harbor.
Right. Right. It's a perfect example.
Right, and very often we find that it's the liberal elite who are the ones who most utilize environmental review as a backdrop
Right.
for their NIMBYism, for things remaining exactly the way they are.
Right. It's almost become a weapon against
It has
any
been used as a
progress.
weapon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The bureaucracy and the red tape.
Yeah.
I think that is probably the most detrimental thing to getting anything accomplished. It's just the layers of everything. And then we do have that different phenomenon out here where we also have people with very deep pockets who, when all else fails, then they will just tie you up in court and try to stop it. And so I think we need to really, first take a look at process and what is holding us back.
And that's not happening just with housing on the East End.
No, it's happening with everything.
That's happening with everything. That's happening with housing throughout the United States.
Right.
It's happening with infrastructure development. It's happening with roads, pipelines, fixing
Right.
bridges.
Right.
It's happening with building new communities. It's happening with virtually everything. And the irony of it is that this is not a bipartisan movement,
Right.
but it's being talked mostly about by Democrats.
Right.
Okay, now personally, I'm a blank. I'm not affiliated with the
Right.
party. But you also notice things like, and you pointed out that in the red states, the states that are governed by more conservative governments, there's more housing being built
Right.
in each of the red states in the United States. Texas being number 1, Florida being number 2.
Right.
You just go down the list and there's very
By
few.
a significant amount.
Right.
that they've been increasing, where blue states overall, and it really is, you know, a quantifiable trend.
There's actually a bill that's up, and let me just mention this, and then
Mhm.
New York State Senator Rachel May is a strong advocate for sustainable housing and sprawl prevention act. So there's actually a bill in New York State right now, and the Sustainable Housing and Sprawl Prevention Act is a significant step towards streamlining the housing permitting process to align with environmental and affordability goals.
Right.
Reduce, vehicle miles because people live in the towns they work in, so that takes their cars off the road. It
Right.
reduces traffic, it reduces fossil fuel. About limiting environmental review, not to eliminating it, but by limiting it and taking its use as a weapon away.
Right.
And that's very much in line with things that even the county executive of Suffolk County, Ed Romaine, he doesn't like to see sprawl. He wants to see more concentrated development
Right.
in our hamlets and in the places where people can walk to work and walk to school, walk to the library.
Well, and overall, statistically, the affordable housing developments, as they're being built today, tend to be more green than
Oh, sure.
any private development.
Sure.
So, I mean, the Amagansett one, I remember when I went when they were planning it, and, you know, they're catching the rainwater, there's gardens. You know, really was an amazing, impressive green project.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
and it's funny, one of the points that they made in the book, you know, it goes through, there's a whole section on housing and how we've painted ourselves into this corner. But then there were other examples of, you know, it's like with the environmentalism, which is great, but in California, which is super green, you know, 14 years in, and they're trying to build the high-speed rail, which would improve, you know, the environment in California significantly, but yet every single town that they want to put it through has their own different rules, regulations. Everybody needs a study.
Requirements
Right, everybody needs
for
to.
environmental review.
Right, so in 14 years, they have gotten nothing done.
Nowhere.
And, you know, the point was made that sometimes you just have to declare an emergency. And that is the only way to get it done, like the bridge in Maryland. When the bridge in Maryland came down, that project should have taken years, you know, if you were just trying to go through regular channels. But because Maryland, Governor Westmore declared in a state of an emergency, they got it done in, what, weeks?
Months or whatever,
Yeah.
but quickly,
Right.
sure.
And the same with the interstate. I think when Biden was in, that one of the interstates, an overpass collapsed, and there was no way around it. And, you know, within weeks, by declaring the emergency, I think it was only like 2 weeks, and they got it back up.
Right.
And because when you kind of have to get something done, and you take away some of the layers of bureaucracy, and you can get it done, and the world didn't fall apart, you know, now we have, you know,
That
the
bridge
bridges
and
were,
that highway to
right.
serve the people. Yeah, I mean,
Right.
we're all a little bit kind of dulled by the constant term crisis, right? We've been
Mm-hmm.
talking about a housing crisis for how long? I mean, we're numb to even the word crisis. So
Right.
if we've had a housing crisis, that means that we have an emergency. A crisis is an emergency, right?
Right.
So why have we not created emergency responses
Right.
to the housing crisis?
Right.
I guess maybe people don't agree that it's a crisis. It's just,
Well, I think maybe
It's
we
just
should start
somebody
using the
else's
word
problem.
emergency, and that might maybe, you know.
Okay, let's do it.
I don't know.
all right? It's official. It's now a
yeah.
housing emergency, not a housing crisis.
Right.
But we've got to
So-
get enough people to agree that it is to take the steps necessary in order to start alleviating it.
Right.
And that's what I think Klein and
Right.
Thompson talk about
Right.
in this book.
Yeah.
So what was the most interesting thing that you got from the book?
Other than the fact that the red states were doing better than the blue states, I think that one actually really shocked me.
Did it?
I was surprised by it. You know, and then just the idea too that, you know, how we're funding these things, and we're putting up more roadblocks. So put aside like the zoning and the regulations and the environmentalism and the people coming out, you know, against everything. Then when we finally get to the point where people agree that something has to be done, and now you go to plan it and fund it and then build it. And every single step along the way,
Yeah.
there are different roadblocks. So especially in particular, like taking the grants. So every time you accept a grant, and I know this has been a frequent topic of conversation out here among people that are talking about housing and you know, our elected politicians, every time you you accept a grant, each grant has different strings attached, and you're for the most part, cobbling together several grants to get something done, and they can have, you know, competing requirements. So I think at some point we really need to talk about, you know, when we get to this emergency level, does the community want to support floating a bond and doing some of this ourselves? And maybe cutting some of that red tape. When you also accept the grants, it's, you know, you have to jump through so many steps, and everything has to go out to bid. And a lot of times, you know, and I do work on another municipal board where we are subject to that, to the bidding process, and strict requirements on getting anything built. And I can tell you, it does take longer, and it makes projects cost more. It also prevents you many times from using your local builders to build a small
Yeah.
project. And,
It
you know, that's another thing. I mean, a lot of times you would like to use, you know, a smaller local builder. But your hands are tied because of all the requirements and the layers of requirements.
Well, that, you know, that serves a point that I've been making for years, perfectly, that we'd really be much better off if our local builders were the ones that were developing community
Yes.
housing in small developments, 6 units, 12 units. If we had 1,000 points of light, okay, and if we did not eliminate the small builder from being able to create community housing, then we wouldn't have to wait for the large out-of-town developers
Right.
to come in with their big pocketbooks and with their attorneys and with their ability to wait, and spend all that extra money. So if we woke up from this sleep that we were in and encourage local developers to build more affordable community housing, that would resolve a lot of our challenges.
Right.
But we just don't seem to be able to do that, and that's really frustrating.
Well, and then we wind up with just luxury condos everywhere.
Sure. So local developers focus on where they're gonna get the most money because they're told, no, you can't serve community by
Right.
putting 6 apartments on this same lot.
Right.
You can't put a 6,000 square foot, 6 apartment house on a lot that you can put a 6,000 square foot luxury home.
Right.
So what are you gonna do? You need to feed your family, you need to make a living, you wanna be successful, so you'll do the luxury home.
Right.
And sorry, can't do the affordable housing.
Right. I mean, you notice, you know, even like in Watermill, there's a big new complex there on the highway. That's
That's correct.
not affordable housing, right?
There are,
There are a
I
few
think
units.
10% of the units they did are affordable.
Okay.
Okay, so that, and I can't tell you the particulars on it. I know that some of them are
Right.
selling for the upper 1s and 2s, and then maybe some of the other units are selling for in
Right.
the 8s or the 9s. Do you have that?
No, and I was curious about it because that's, you know, another example of, you know, you didn't hear too much against that project, so, but it's on the highway in a crowded area, you know, so you always hear, you know, traffic, water, you know, over density, but yet you don't hear those when it's a luxury complex, so,
Right, you don't, and it is the Suffolk County Workforce Housing Act that requires a developer to create at least 10% of their housing, I believe it is, as
Unless they put that
affordable
money
when you
into a
do
fund.
a develop. The
We
other
have that
challenge
too.
that we've had with that is that there's been a buyout of
Right.
that. So if you are building, and a good case in point was the Watch Case development in Sag Harbor. They were required to either put 10% of the housing as affordable or make a contribution to a fund, which ended up starting the Sag Harbor housing fund.
Right,
And we got no affordable housing as a result of it. So there were people fighting. It was going to be where those townhouses are now on that street across from the church. And no, we don't need affordable housing, because of everybody, so many people's bias against it and
Right.
misunderstanding in terms of what it's for. So, but I think those buyouts are starting to slow down now, and I think there's been some municipalities that have created rules that don't allow for a buyout.
right, so you have to force.
But that would have been a good
the
thing to have
units
done
in.
20 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, so topic shift, although we could talk about this book all day.
Forever.
Let's talk about prioritizing first responders for housing, because that frequently is something that will bring a lot of people on board, because everyone wants to make sure that their EMTs and their police and your hospital workers are housed in your community. And, as the years go on out here in particular, we're having a problem, because anyone who would be in a position to be a first responder, they're all moving away. So they're always struggling to get people. So, a lot of time the discussion has been like, well, can we prioritize, give them some sort of priority or some sort of, bump up in the lottery process? If you are, an EMT or a fire person. And we've always been told, no, that's not really, you're not really able to do that. However, I do notice that it is being done in some areas of the country. And then here on Long Island, Babylon started doing it, Southold is doing it, Huntington is doing it, and I believe that there is some sort of legislation at the Suffolk County level that is being designed to try to allow first responders to get some sort of priority choice in affordable housing. And I think if they can do that, one, it's necessary, it's needed, but also two, I think that takes away an impediment and also gives an incentive in the community's mind to the value. I think it adds value to
Sure.
affordable housing as a concept that you want to support, as opposed to, not in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
I don't know, do you know anything about that new legislation?
Here's what I do know about it. There's federal legislation that is stalled for that. There's state legislation, which is stalled. There's been some local and municipal legislation. Southold created a rule, a code that allowed first responders to get preference
Right.
for affordable housing. And then they said, oh, well, that's great, I'm a first responder, but they have no affordable housing to provide.
Right.
So that was nice window dressing in terms of promoting that.
Right.
The thing that Southold had to do was they had to make it open to any first responder in Suffolk County.
Right.
And
But again, that might have been because of the grant restriction, if they took county money.
well, the
right?
bottom line about doing pure local anything is that their federal fair housing law is an umbrella over
Right.
all fair housing and
Right.
all affordable housing. And if you are pulling from a body of people that is very, monocultural, then someone could make the claim that it's not fair housing for people of all ages, diversity, all cultures, and all.
But you could equate it with employee housing where it's your, so I think we need to really take it, again, that's another thing that's set up in a way. It's a great thing on its own, just like environmentalism is great. But, if it's preventing us from having any firemen and EMTs,
Amen.
we might need to take a little look at that.
We do, and different
And other communities are somehow getting around it, so I do think that.
Well, they're doing it by opening it up to a large enough sample
Right.
that there is diversity in there.
Right.
Okay, if you have a fire department that has, 50 members and all of them are white, and it's a government-sponsored initiative, there could be a claim of a lack of diversity in there. So if you open it up to a pool that includes enough people from different backgrounds and different races and things like that, then, you know, there's less likely.
Yeah, and I don't know the makeup of our local fire department. How
Right.
many, like, we have a lot of Latino population, so, you know, we may have
I would
a very
imagine.
diverse,
Yeah.
you know, first
Yeah.
responder pool where
Yeah.
this could work for our community.
But
And
there's
bring
also,
in people to, you know, it would be a win-win. If you're looking at things community-wide, you know, just like, you know, the town and the village and the schools used to operate very, you know, very separated. And now, you know, like the high school is doing with the village, an EMT class that's going to now feed seniors into maybe working on our ambulance crews. So I think we need to really, you know, start thinking outside the box and trying new things.
amen.
One very successful program that we can model from is the Lease to Locals program on Nantucket, which is having
Absolutely.
great success. We've talked before about, you know, rent subsidies, where some communities are subsidizing rent if you bring your property back onto a year-round rental for working-class local families.
Yep.
And Nantucket does it a little bit differently. If you have not rented your house or you've rented it on the short-term market and you bring it back in and you're going to rent it year-round through their housing authority, then they give you, instead of monthly subsidies, they give you a lump sum. So you get half of that up front and half of it at the end of the first season. And so far, they only started it in September, and now this is Nantucket, where it's not very big. And they've added 35 new units of year-round housing and are housing 83 local people in, you know, less than a year.
In less than a year, that's, and that's one of
By
the-
giving this financial incentive
Right.
to their community homeowners.
And this conversation we have all the time is the fact there's no magic bullet.
Right.
There's
It's a
no
menu.
one
Right.
thing that's going to help solve this housing emergency.
Right.
But there's at least 20 things that we all need to be doing at the same time in our communities.
Right.
To address it, and this one, Lease to Locals, is one of it. Lease to Locals is an innovative local partnership providing property owners cash incentives,
Right.
okay, to convert their units into new long-term rentals for local staff. So it's happening in California, it's happening in Massachusetts.
Right.
It's happening in Nevada. And Lease to Locals would love to, Placemate is the name of the firm that manages that, would love to do something here as well. So we can make that introduction to our
And
local government.
I think we should, because also we do have the funds from the Community Housing Fund
Community
tax.
Housing Fund, that's right.
And as they're, you know, considering how to do this, they're starting to do some down payment things and other small things. But this really, you know, whether you give it out like Nantucket does as a lump sum, or you do it like some other communities do, where they're supplementing the landlord between the rent that the local families can pay and the market rent that the landlord would otherwise get, doing short-term rentals. There are options, and we now have a funding mechanism that may be available to do some of these things.
Absolutely. One of the real important and attractive components of the Community Housing Fund was that when you use local funds, you can apply it for local initiatives. But when you use state funds,
Right.
you then have to be inclusive of anybody in the state.
Right.
So the attractiveness of using local funds for local initiatives is really valid. But you still have to take fair housing laws.
Right, fair
into
housing laws
effect.
are gonna exist for anything. I
For
think we all
anything.
agree that those are, you know, obviously there for a very good reason.
Right.
But just having the flexibility to
Sure.
do that.
Sure. It says right here, earn up to $27,000 through Lease to Locals.
Right.
So, I mean, if you are thinking of renting your house for the summer for $60,000, maybe you could rent it to a year-round client for
Right.
40, or 36,000, 3,000 a month. I mean, there are families who are used to
Right.
paying that now. And you could make up the difference from the Lease to Locals program. So
And
we're
most
gonna
local families I
introduce
know
that.
cannot afford more than $3,000 a month, seems to be the going rate. And all of the rentals out here are $5,500 to $6,000 a month. So, you know,
Yeah.
the math just doesn't math, so.
Well, the math doesn't work because what's the math on what you should be paying
Right, if you.
for your housing?
Right.
You should be paying 30% of your
30% of your,
housing.
yeah,
So if you're paying $30,000 a year, that means that, you should be making 100,000.
right,
And there are a lot of people who are making 100,000 right now. There
Right,
are.
right.
Salaries have gone up over the years,
right,
but there's a lot of people who are making much less as
Right.
well. That need to be taken into consideration.
but, to make a 6,000 rent payment, you're gonna have to be earning over 200,000 a year.
Oh, yeah, easy,
So
easy.
that is a problem out here for a lot of
72,
people.
yeah, over 200,000 a year. So
Right.
it's really, so this Lease to Locals program is something that we're going to introduce to
Yeah.
our local
Yeah,
leaders.
I'd love to have that conversation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you want to
we-
talk at all about the Cape Cod Commission as an example, or we also had
the
an event this
Yeah,
weekend?
your event was fabulous, and the idea that most excited me was the community housing, how would you term that?
It was, we met with Steve Rosenberg about
Community Housing Trust.
the Hudson
right?
Valley Community Housing and Conservation Group that's formed
Right.
with housing professionals as well as conservation folks
Right.
in Hudson Valley, and they're seeing a great deal of success. And again, we know,
Right,
even though we're housing advocates, we know how important our environment is, and we want to conserve it and preserve it as well. So that's another thing that we're going to be
Yeah.
introducing to the community is,
because there are a lot of communities that have the Affordable Housing Trust, like Nantucket actually used for theirs. They have some sort of similar mechanism. But then in Hudson Valley, they took the Affordable Housing Trust and kind of married it with like the Nature Conservancy, say,
yeah,
right?
yeah, and they're
And so the
great
two of them work
partners.
together, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that I thought was an exciting possibility.
So in closing, we have a slide, I think, that we wanted to put up, didn't we? And go ahead and explain this one.
Yeah, so basically, whether government is bigger or smaller is the wrong question. What it needs to be is better. It needs to justify itself, not through the rules it follows, but through the outcomes it delivers. So we are,
Amen to that.
we need to see significant outcomes.
We need results.
Yeah, we need results,
In a timely manner.
yes.
And you can help by going to your town and village board meetings
And
and
supporting,
sharing and
yeah.
supporting them and doing good things in good time.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks for being
Christina.
Thank
It was
you.
fun.